everyone. My name is Don Parkinson, and I'm a consultation specialist with S&C Lavalin. Today we are continuing our series of live stream topics as our project moves through consultation round 2 of the environmental assessment phase. The topics we are covering parallel our project activities, so we hope these will help our viewers and listeners better understand the project and provide some input along the way. So let's get started. Today we're going to talk about the proposed aggregate and rock source areas to help community members get a better understanding of the thinking behind and the activities associated with the process. So let's move now to talk a little bit about what we're going to cover today. We're going to, as we always do, provide a little bit of project background. We're going to remind everyone of the alternatives assessment process. Then we're going to get to our topic for today, which is the proposed aggregate and rock source areas. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you can contact us. So let's first start with the project location. And Webequie First Nation is located about 250 kilometers from both Hudson Bay and James Bay. And it's a community of about 900 members as well, located in northwestern Ontario. There are three main purposes of the Webequie Supply Road. The first is to move materials, supplies, and people from the Webequie Airport to the McFalds Lake area. Second is to provide employment and economic development opportunities to Webequie while allowing them to preserve and enhance their language and culture. And then finally, to provide the experience and training opportunities for youth to help encourage the pursuit of additional skills through post-secondary education. So as I've said many times, this is more than just a two-lane gravel road. There's more to an all-season community road or an all-season road than just those two lanes. So now I'm going to get into a bit of a description of the project for you to give you a sense of what it entails. The planned road would be 107 kilometers long, extending from Webequie First Nation Airport to McFalds Lake in the Ring of Fire area, east of Muckatai River. 17 kilometers of this road would sit within Webequie First Nation reserve lands. We are working with a preliminary planning corridor that is 2 kilometers in width, and within which we will consider the route alternatives. And then we're talking about a final corridor width or cleared area, or also right-of-way for the road of about 35 meters, and again, two-lane gravel surface road. There are three major water body crossings. The first would be running from the island where the Webequie settlement sits, east across Winisk Lake. This is a crossing that spans about 200 to 250 meters. The second crossing is the Winiskis Channel to the south of the Winisk Lake crossing. And that crossing is between 30 and 40 meters in width. And then the final major crossing is across the Muckatai River at the extreme east end of the project. And again, between 30 and 40 meters is the span of that crossing. And as I mentioned, the road is not just a two-lane gravel road. It includes both temporary and permanent aggregate pit or rock quarry areas with equipment for processing. And then as well, it also includes access roads and crossing structures to get access to those pit and quarry areas. Construction camps would be temporary, but they would be located along the route to accommodate construction crews, and operations and maintenance offices would be permanent. There would be probably a couple of these along the route ultimately, And each of those operations and maintenance offices would include supportive facilities such as wastewater treatment plants and drinking water or potable water storage areas. And as well as part of the construction work for the project, storage and laydown yards would be needed on a temporary basis for equipment and materials. Let's now move into the alternatives assessment process. Just for a brief review of that, you may remember under the Environmental Assessment Act, for every undertaking, such as a project, a quote, reasonable range of alternatives must be considered during the environmental assessment. And these alternatives include both alternatives to and alternative methods. When we talk about alternatives to the proposed undertaking or project, these are functionally different ways of approaching and dealing with a problem or opportunity. When we talk about alternative methods, we're talking about different ways of carrying out the proposed undertaking or project. Um, so different ways of doing the same activity. So let's get into some examples to describe this. When we talk about alternatives to, some examples of these might be different modes of transport. So maybe cargo balloons or cargo hovercraft or rail. Um, Another alternative to could be managing traffic demands so that the demand isn't there for such a project. Um, Upgrading existing trails to seasonal winter roads if an existing trail existed as a possibility, or as always exists, there is the do nothing option as well. Let's now look at alternative methods. And when we're looking at alternative methods of carrying out a proposed undertaking, again, these are different ways of doing the same activity. And in the case of an all-season road, these would be different routes. So as you can see, we have alternative route 1, alternative route 2, and alternative route 3 within the preferred corridor. Let's move now to today's topic of focus, and that's the proposed aggregate and rock source areas. So when we look at these areas, we apply criteria and indicators, general ones, which I've talked about previously, but also specific ones for supporting infrastructure. And they help, and these criteria and indicators help us evaluate the different alternatives for supporting infrastructure, such as proposed quarries and pits. So some of the factors we would consider would be the actual deposit, the size of the deposit of aggregate or rock. So we would look at the volume, estimated volume and quality of aggregate and rock sources. And then another factor that I just touched on earlier is access roads. How long would the access roads be to get to a particular pit or potential pit or quarry location? How many water crossings would be involved? How many structures would have to be built? What kinds of structures? Would they be smaller structures, like, or less expensive structures like culverts, or could they be larger structures such as bridges? So when we move to talk about pits and quarries, there are in the Webequie Supply Road project area, there are basically 12 potential aggregate and rock source areas. And when we look at the project needs in terms of the construction phase, we're looking at probably around 155,000 dump trucks of earth fill. And when we look at gravel, or aggregate, or type of aggregate, a classification of aggregate, you'd probably be looking at about 129,700 dump trucks. That's a lot of dump trucks. And then in terms of rock, it's not nearly as much. You're looking at 150 dump trucks of rock. The rock would mainly be used typically to protect the openings of culverts, around the openings of culverts, to prevent erosion as well too. And then you'll see on your screen as well here the operations and maintenance phase and the requirements to maintain the road. So you're looking at 2 million cubic meters um, of gravel and 5,000 cubic meters of rock. So significantly less material would be required to maintain the road through its typical 75-year lifespan. So let's now move to have a look at the potential aggregate source areas from a regional basis. And you may not be very clear on your screen, but the pinkish colored areas are areas of known deposits of aggregate or bedrock in the region. So our team started with these specific areas and worked from here. And then the next slide focuses on the western sector of the road, so closer to Webequie First Nation. And in that western sector, we've identified three deposit areas, three potential aggregate source areas, and they're labeled as ARA 1, 2, and 3. And as we move further south and more central in the project, we have, you'll see on the next slide, um, 6 more. So ARA 4 to 9, 6 more potential source areas. And again, these are of varying quality, and we're going to get into that in a minute, just so you can see the decision process and what's involved and helping to identify the best areas to serve as aggregate or rock sources. And then our next slide shows the eastern portion of the Webequie Supply Road. Uh, and on there we have 5 different potential aggregate or rock source areas. And again, as you probably know, this stretch of the road goes through the lowland areas, the James Bay lowland areas, very muskeg-like terrain. So there really is not aren't there really aren't significant deposits in this region. So if we can move to the next slide, we go through a screening process in looking at these alternative aggregate sources. So in the case of those two of the areas that I mentioned before, ARA 2 and ARA 3, they show good quality material, so medium to coarse sand and rock, and are very close to the preferred route with short access roads, which then limits the environmental footprint of the project with a short access road. So those were identified as preferred sites. Now ARA4 is, and as you'll see in a minute, the best potential site for aggregate and rock. It's a large deposit of very good quality material, gravel and sand. It's further away from the WSR preferred route and requires a longer access road, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But it's still a preferred site, mainly because of the quality of the material and the size of the deposit. And then when we look at areas like ARA 5 and ARA 12, the material isn't suitable. It can't be used for construction. And there's different reasons why that is. In some cases, the material is too fine, so it couldn't be. It's just not suitable for the purposes that it's needed for. And then you look at areas like ARA 1, ARA 8, and ARA 9. Very limited suitable material. Um, these are very small deposits. Could be rock outcrops, and the effort that would be taken, like access roads, and setting up aggregate and quarry facilities to make these sites, just doesn't make it worth pursuing. It would cause too much environmental disturbance, for too little material to use for the project. And then when we look at ARA 6 and 7, these are not suitable as well. Limited quality of material. not easy to access for the majority of the road construction in the western area, as the road would need to start from the community of Webequie. So there's a construction sequence, and those two deposits just don't fit the construction planning process. As we move to the next slide, it shows ARA 2, 3, and 4 and the estimated volumes of aggregate and rock in each of these locations. So as you can see, ARA 4 is a massive deposit consisting of between 4 million and 8 million cubic meters of material. So these are that is a significant area. And again, the estimated volume required for construction and operation is about 4.85 million cubic meters. Um, so when we look at this, it's a bit of a puzzle. We look at the different areas and we create different options to meet the required volume. So option 1 is using areas ARA 3 and 4. Option 2 would be using ARA 2 and ARA 4. Option 3, ARA 2, 3, and 4. And then option 4 is using just ARA 4. So it's a bit of a puzzle. We look at these areas, and the next slide will show you how this looks, how this puzzle looks. I'm going to try and bring it up on the screen here for myself. And so when we look at these areas, you can see the massive size of ARA 4, which actually is a deposit that is both on Webequie reserve lands and on crown lands outside of Webequie reserve lands. So that's ARA 4. The other options you can see using ARA 2, 3, and 4. So we look at these different options, and then we start comparing the options. And we compare the options by looking at, first of all, whether they meet the quantity requirements, uh, the ease of access to get to these areas, how close they are to the beginning of construction in Webequie itself, how close, or sorry, the long-term source of aggregates, whether they're a long-term source of aggregates, meaning for operations later on as well. We look at the multi-factor score ranking. I've talked about that before, where we look at many different factors, physical, biological factors, indigenous related factors such as traditional land use and cultural use areas. We take all of that information from each of the categories, and we put them together and come up with an overall rank. And as you can probably see on your screen, option 2, which involves a combination of material from both areas ARA 2 and ARA 4, is the top ranked uh, aggregate and rock source areas. Or they are the top ranked and the preferred option based on our analysis. This next slide that you'll see on the screen, it shows so it says multi-factor score, so it shows how much each factor, such as living environment, physical environment, indigenous land use and interests, socioeconomic environment, and technical considerations. It looks at how much each of these contributes to the score. So the lower the score, the less damage, or the less damage, the less the area sits on sensitive lands, whether they're for living environment reasons or indigenous land use reasons. So this just gives you an idea of the type of analysis we go through. And then if we move to the next slide, we talk here. What we're looking at here is that colored map to your right is one of the sensitivity maps that shows the scoring. Low scores are preferred over high scores, so it shows the degree of impact that, in this case, an access road to. So in this image on the right, you're comparing two access roads to access ARA 4, that large deposit at the southeast corner of the Webequie First Nation Reserve, and so it's comparing the two. So. Um, Road option 1 is 10 kilometers long and it has no watercourse crossings. But then road option 2 is shorter at 3.5 kilometers long, so 65% shorter, but it has one major watercourse crossing. So this is the kind of exercise that we go through to identify impact. So we do this not just for the road, but we also do it for any supporting infrastructure. So the pits and the quarries and anything associated with getting to the pits and quarries, whether it's the access roads or crossing structures, etc. So we might look at the water courses that are crossed. Are they very sensitive water courses? Are they spawning areas? All those things come into play here. And this next slide looks at the two options. Option 1, the 10-kilometer long road, and then option 2. So we look at the route, we look at the route length, and we look at the number of water crossings. We look at the footprint. So the footprint is how much land are we impacting. So a longer road, a road that's 10 kilometers long, leaves a bigger footprint than one that's 3.5 kilometers long. And then we look at the multi-factor score, and then we assign an overall rank. And as you can see on the screen here, option 2 was ranked first. This is the shorter access road with one major watercourse crossing. And the next slide basically shows the different contributions, whether it's living environment or physical environment or indigenous land use and interests, or socioeconomic environment or technical considerations, how much they contribute to the score. So that just gives you an idea. It's very similar to the chart I showed earlier. So that just about wraps up everything with today's live stream. I want to encourage everyone to contact us. We would love to speak with you about the project, hear your comments and questions, and more importantly, we would love to visit your community to talk to you about the project. So if you could reach out to us, we would accept your invitation and respect your consultation protocols as well too. So um, please join us. And we would love to come to your community and talk to you and just get your feedback. So that wraps up today's discussion of proposed aggregate or rock source areas. We hope it was helpful and encourages you to join us again in 2 weeks. Don't forget to keep in touch with our project team members via the contact information available on our website, supplyroad.ca. Miigwech, and we will talk to you again in 2 weeks when we continue our discussion of topics related to the Webequie Supply Road project. Miigwech, see you soon.